Ready? Louder? Okay, welcome to the finale of Conservation Week. Thank you all for coming today. Thank you to everyone who made the events on campus so inspiring. The conservation community here, I think, has inspired each other to dream big, to communicate broadly, and to practice compassion and love for nature and each other as we go about our work. My name is Megan Adams. I'm a PhD student here in geography and a member of the ecology at UVic community. I'm a coastal ecologist, and I mostly work in a Wekano territory in Rivers Inlet. And there's a word up there in the Wekalo language I want to share today. It's ala, to hold in the palms of your hands. This word informs the gratitude I bring this afternoon to acknowledging the unceded territories of the Songhees, the Esquimalt, and Saanich people that we meet on today. This land and its people, past and present, graciously and generously hold us in its palms. It is a cradle for all the growing and sharing we can do on this campus and in our homes. And when I met with some elders last week in the First Peoples House, they also reminded me not just to acknowledge the land and the people, but to acknowledge the ancestors that are here beside us today, and to ask them to keep us all safe, especially those people traveling far distances and on planes especially. So they said I could extend that to you, Michael. I have the immense pleasure today of introducing Michael Soulé as a featured lecturer of the Department of Geography Speaker Series and as part of the Ecology at UVic Conservation Week events. Michael's a foundational contributor to the concept, the discipline, and the official Society for Conservation Biology. And while his list of accreditations and accolades is long and noteworthy, I think the word ala describes best what Michael does for the conservation movement. Through his gentle leadership and steadfast guidance, he holds us up to show us what we could be and what we could do for Earth's ecosystems. Mentor of our lab and Michael's colleague, Dr. Paul Paget, sums it up best. He says, Michael has been my source of inspiration and ideas. Humble and down to earth as an academic, yet with such depth and breadth of knowledge and a desire to create and inspire others to create new understanding. He has always cared so deeply about doing good in and for this world and showing love and care in the most wonderful of ways. He opened doors and our eyes to what can be rather than what is, to what can be rather than what is. How can you ever thank him? So how lucky we are to hear thoughts from Michael himself today in this space. He has some books from Island Press that he's selling at the end that are signed. And I have a book today from Michael from the community, Art for an Oil-Free Coast, courtesy of Raincoast. Thank you so much for joining us. Please join me in welcoming Michael.
Thank you. Thank you, Megan. There's all sorts of switches here, but I think I can figure it out. I think I'll start showing some slides, and then if there's time, I'll go on a little bit longer. People are beginning to call the current era the Anthropocene, or the Anthropocene, whatever. That means literally the era of man, or mankind, or humankind. And it means the end of another era, the end of an era where biological processes such as natural selection, evolution, occurred. Can you hear me in the back? No. Maybe I should use this. Is this on? Does it work? Yes. Okay. I don't want to break it. So the Anthropocene also implies the end of something important, the end of evolution. It means there will be no more evolution, except for microorganisms, perhaps, or very small creatures like aphids and ticks and bugs, terrible things like that. But as far as vertebrates go, except for the very smallest fish and smallest amphibians, it implies, and many evolutionary biologists generally assume, that the evolution of new species by the process of speciation is over. So it's much more than a new era of humankind. It's the end of 500 million years of organic evolution. Humans now dominate the globe and are controlling the movement of creatures and are moving creatures all over the planet, so that any incipient species that is starting to evolve will be, their gene pool will be continually invaded by genes from places that are inappropriate for them to, and so their evolution will not fit their environment, if there is any evolution. So the major event that the Anthropocene announces is that there will be no more new species on the planet of anything larger than bugs, basically. That's a very serious issue, and it's not spoken of very much because it's too horrible to conceive of. Now, evolution of new species takes a long time, especially of larger creatures like vertebrate animals, like amphibians and fish and reptiles and mammals and birds. So it's not just the era of complete human domination of all ecological processes and of all places. It means the end of natural processes, including the most important natural process, which is speciation. Speciation is one of the varieties of evolution. It means the origin of new species, and new species originate because a population becomes isolated, often on an island or beyond a mountain range, so that there's very little gene flow, movement of individuals and their genes across the barrier. So isolation, unless it's complete, cannot occur. Because, in part, because, as I said, human beings are moving creatures all over the planet. So the major disaster that we're beginning to see happen is that the termination of a process that's been going on for 500 million years. And it now is ending due to our domination, ubiquity, and absolute control of everything that's happening on the planet. Do I have anything positive to say? Were you thinking, oh shit? Well, there are positive things that are happening, but we need to understand the seriousness of what our domination and our population explosion, our ubiquity, and the movement of creatures around the world very quickly is causing. Some people are depressed that Lord Man has achieved this total biological domination. But other people, I call them the Dominators, are gleeful about humanity's final victory because it means that every place on the planet is now under our control, is now managed domesticated, safe for human beings, tame. As I said, some people are rather happy about that because there will be no surprises except the big surprises that we're causing by pollution of the atmosphere and pollution of the oceans, and those are bad enough. So decades ago, I wrote a paper about this, declaring that evolution of new species of plants and animals is through. Like all the papers I published, nobody paid any attention. But there are species that are incipient still in Cuba and in Florida. For example, the Florida scrub jay has been diverging slowly over the last thousands of years to become a separate species of scrub jay, as has a scrub jay off the coast of California on some of the Channel Islands. So that kind of evolution is still occurring, but the more we move creatures around, the less that will happen. The only islands, the smallest islands that are big enough for speciation to occur, that is, evolution of new species can occur, are Cuba and Hispaniola. They're big enough, they're almost continents, they're microcontinents, and they're big enough for isolation of populations of small mammals and reptiles like lizards to occur. But it takes a space bigger than that for the evolution, for a new species of birds and mammals to evolve. So, and that's increasingly unlikely. The evolution of human beings into new species also is probably unlikely in the future. Right now, we're the only hominid on the planet, and that's been the case for several million years. At one time, there were as many as 5 or 6 different kinds of humans on the planet. But one species basically achieved domination and killed the Neanderthals and the other older races of humans. And right now, there are 3 kinds of humans that could become new species. The pygmies in Africa, the Hottentots in Africa, and the Bushmen in Africa. But their culture and population dynamics are being strictly controlled by the dominant humans in Africa. So they won't create new species. I would call those 3 groups subspecies, but it's politically incorrect to do that. We call them races sometimes, which is a little more politically correct than calling them subspecies. Subspecies does have this tone of sub, meaning lower, which is unfortunate. But if an objective taxonomist were to look at those 3 groups and compare them to the rest of humanity, they would decide that they were certainly separate populations. However, they've been interbreeding with the dominant population of humans for several thousand years now. And so they will be merged with the rest of us. Let me tell you a story. When I was starting to teach at the University of California at San Diego in La Jolla, I was looking around for something to do with all these students who wanted to make a name for themselves. So I said, well, let's go out in the field. Always get good ideas when you're in the field. And I had an idea in my brain about what to do. And one of the things I thought it'd be interesting to do would be to look at the consequences of isolation of a population and what happened to it. And so I knew there was a canyon on Point Loma, which is a little peninsula that sticks south towards Mexico, towards Baja California, from San Diego. So I'd never been to that canyon. I said, let's go to that canyon and see what species of birds are surviving in that canyon. Because that was soon after the publication of the book on island biogeography by Robert MacArthur and E.O. Wilson, which was one of the most important books to be published in the 20th century. And I thought that the students ought to know about biogeography and the consequences of being isolated on islands. And a canyon that's surrounded by housing developments is a perfect island. So I thought, well, let's begin by looking at some of these canyons. So we went to Point Loma and looked at this canyon and started to listen for bird calls, because that's what birds do. And so we listened and we listened and we listened. Nothing. No birds, except for some junk birds like scrub jays, who go everywhere, and mockingbirds who go everywhere. But there were none of the birds that are that don't fly very far. For example, a wren tit is a bird that occurs in the chaparral in Southern California, and it's a very weak flyer. It doesn't like to leave the canyon that it's in, and they have made it to the Columbia River in northern Washington, but they've never crossed it. They can't get across the Columbia River. I mean, in theory, they could fly across, but they're weak flyers and they're slow, and they're likely to be grabbed by a predator on the way, a peregrine or some other bird like that. So we listened for maybe an hour, and there was not a bird call. And I said, well, this is interesting. Maybe there aren't any birds in this canyon. Maybe we should look at some other canyons and see if there's any birds. And there were. We found 30 other canyons in San Diego, and they all had some birds. So I said, well, let's do an analysis to see what seems to be the determining variables about the number of kinds of birds that occur in a canyon. And of course, in the back of my mind was the theories of island biogeography, and a priori we guessed that the bigger the canyon, the more species of birds there would be, and the closer the canyon was to other habitats where birds occur, the more species of birds there should be, native birds. And that's what we found in general. But it was still shocking to find that some canyons with perfect habitat only had one or two or no species at all. So I asked the students, well, let's try to figure out what's going on. Why does that canyon on Point Loma have no birds, and why do some canyons only have one or two species of birds, and some have 7, was about the maximum. And I said, do you have any idea why that might be? And I knew, because I'd grown up in San Diego, and I knew what our cats did. Our cats would bring home birds. Cats are recreational hunters. They get bored in the afternoon, so they go off into the canyon and do a little hunting. They're not hungry because most of the cats in San Diego get fed plenty of food. So they don't need to hunt, but it's instinctive for them, like it is for a lot of guys to go hunting. So we did a survey of 30 canyons, and we found that the canyons that were close to other canyons had more birds. The canyons that were really isolated had only 1 or 2 species, except for the one that was really isolated in Point Loma, and all the birds there had gone extinct. And I said, well, what's causing the extinction of these birds? And some students had a clue, because they'd had cats that would bring home birds, but most of the students didn't know. So that's when I realized, and and we published eventually, because that's what scientists have to do, that it was cats that were causing most of these extinctions. Extinctions would occur on islands anyway, even without cats eventually, for other reasons. One is inbreeding. Eventually, a population will get very small just by chance, and there'll be a lot of inbreeding, and deleterious genes will be fixed in the population, and the fitness of the birds will decline, and eventually they'll get diseases, genetic diseases, and the population will disappear. But it was interesting to see that this could be observed on the scale of isolated island habitats in a town the size of San Diego. So that's the San Diego story, and that's what encouraged us to look at the evolution of species on a larger scale. A few years ago, I went to Namibia with friends and my wife and my son. That's my son. That's my older son. And he's not doing yoga. He's looking at rocks, because in Namibia, that's about all there is. It doesn't rain in Namibia, sometimes for years in parts of Namibia. And so there aren't many plants to look at, but there are lots of rocks to look at. It's kind of like Utah in that regard. How do I advance these slides? Somebody showed me a while ago.
Do you have your pointer?
Ah, yes. Thank you. No, pointer. This is the pointer, but oh, the other part of it.
Try this arrow.
Oh, thank you.
Right.
Okay. There's a scientist named Vaclav Smil, who's, I think, at a New York university. Obviously, Vaclav Smil is not really an American name. It's a Czech name. But Vaclav Smil is one of the most brilliant scientists in the world today. And this is a figure that he published. It says, data from Vaclav Smil's The Earth's Biosphere, Evolution, Dynamics, and Change. And what this slide shows is what humans are doing to the planet, and indirectly what they're doing to evolution. The dark part in the middle are representative of the number of humans. Each one of those squares represents 1 million tons of human biomass. I don't know how many people that is, but it's several million humans. And the lighter squares on the outside here represent our pets and livestock. So they're surrogates for humans. I mean, they wouldn't exist if it weren't for humans. And the little tiny dots on the edges, the green ones, represent wild animals. That's pretty impressive. We are doing very well, we people. But our success on the planet means that there's almost no other kinds of creatures but humans and our domestic animals, humans and human food. I can't get over this slide. I mean, it just blows my mind to see how dominant we are on this planet. There's a few elephants here. This is horses here, sheep here. And wild animals are the green areas. But there are hardly any wild mammals left on the planet in comparison to the number of humans. So our job now is to replenish the earth with wild creatures if we want to have any company at all. A lot of us will go a long ways to see a wild creature. My family and I went to Namibia, to Africa, which is one of the only places to see big wild creatures except for deer and elk and things we eat. They're still around because state fish and game organizations want to keep them because they can sell licenses for us to go out and shoot. Now, I'm one of those people that does that sometimes. So I'm kind of glad the Colorado Division of Wildlife makes sure that there's plenty of meat walking around out there. But I'd rather, I'd give up hunting if I knew that these creatures would be replaced by the creatures that have been lost. Like, we have no wolves in Colorado. You've got some around here, but they won't live long unless you continue to work hard to protect and conserve wolves and other large carnivores. But in Colorado, where hunting is a big pastime, as it is in most Western states, there's just too many people with guns who like to shoot things that move, even things that don't move sometimes. And one of the things that people like to shoot most are keystone species. These are species whose ecological impact is much greater than you would expect from their abundance or their body size. They're called keystones because a keystone in an arch, as you know, is a stone that keeps the arch from collapsing from the top down. If you remove that keystone, the arch collapses. And that's what happens when one removes prairie dogs or beavers or wolves or other large carnivores from ecosystems. Ecosystems collapse because they need these species that are strongly interactive in an ecological sense. We need those strongly interactive species to maintain the integrity of ecosystems. They're like the police in the ghetto, to be blunt. They keep things under control. They keep in ecosystems, they prevent the herbivores, such as deer and elk, from getting too abundant and eating up all the vegetation, as was about to happen in Yellowstone when wolves were reintroduced into Yellowstone. And so they're like police that make sure that things don't get out of hand too much. Nature also needs, besides 50%, large core areas containing many kinds of plant and animal populations. These are things like national parks or other protected areas, and foundation species. Foundation species aren't keystones because keystone species are, by definition, relatively rare, not very abundant. Like large carnivores aren't very abundant. It doesn't take many wolves to maintain the integrity of a place like Yellowstone, a couple hundred. But foundation species are those that are necessary to support the ecosystem from the bottom up, not the top down, to produce food like mass, that is seeds that birds eat, and producers, and cavities for cavity nesting birds. So foundation species are just as important as keystone species, but they're generally more abundant. Wrong button. There we go. This is a slide you saw last night. It's just a coincidence. We all like this slide. So Colombia, representing civilization, is marching across the prairie, followed by wagons and trains, 3 trains there, and stagecoaches are coming along, and settlers, pioneers, covered wagons, cowboys, and they're chasing the dark Indians and chasing the wild animals, the bison, who are driving him basically over the cliff. towards extinction. So this represents the good versus the bad. The good are the white Christians who are advancing across the prairie, and the bad are those who aren't white, not Christian, and the wild animals who are eating our grass. It's our grass because God meant it to be for us and our cattle. There are still, unfortunately, in the United States, some of these that still eat our game and prevent total human domination of the environment. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, in Canada, there's still some wolves. We have no wolves in Colorado, we have no wolves in Utah, we have no wolves in Arizona or New Mexico, but there's a wolf or two in Montana, a handful. But if we're successful, we'll get rid of those too. One of the ways of preventing the disappearance of wild nature is what we call the 3 C's. We need large areas of wildlands called cores. We need those keystone species like wolves and mountain lions and beavers and gophers even. And we need the carnivores. And the Wildlands Network has focused on this region called the spine of the continent. This is Yellowstone to Yukon that we heard from Harvey about last night, and going all the way down into Mexico, where there are a few wolves left, Mexican wolves, a subspecies of the gray wolf. Why are you laughing? Some of you don't know. This is an in-joke. This is Peter Kariba, who is actually a sweet guy. When you know, it's very hard to not like people when you're face to face with them. And I've been at meetings with Peter, who, by the way, as the chief scientist of the Nature Conservancy. And we've gotten into some tussles and about not just me, but people like Reed Noss and other conservation biologists. But it's important when you're looking at the function and real purpose of organizations like the Nature Conservancy or any environmental group to look at their board of directors, to Google the board of these organizations. You can learn a lot when you look at the board of directors. So if you want to know what is the driving force behind an organization such as the Nature Conservancy or Conservation International or even the Sierra Club, Google a board and see what kind of people they have on their board. If they're all bankers, you could become a little suspicious. Or if they're all CEOs of very large corporations, you can become suspicious. So that's what started me on my rampage about the Nature Conservancy a few years ago, because they were doing and saying some things that didn't seem to be consistent with their mission statement, nor with what most of their employees wanted. The Nature Conservancy does a lot of good, actually, but their policies are increasingly hampering the good work that they do. So when I'm asked, what should I donate my money to, what kind of conservation groups, generally, I think the best advice is to small local or regional groups that are not being dominated by large corporations. Because if their board is made up of corporate executives, one should be suspicious. Here's a guy I like. This is the guy who made that graphic about how much biomass there is for those different entities, like human beings and their pets and domestic animals. And on the outside, he shows that just a little bit of biomass around the world is concentrated in wild creatures. Vaclav Smil, I love to say that name. It just rolls off the tongue, sorry. Anyway, if you have a chance to look at his writings, they're well worth it. He has written more about the impact of beef, meat consumption, than just about anybody else. He's written 30 or 40 books in the last few decades, and he's probably one of the most brilliant scientists and environmentalists in the world. This is a figure from one of his papers, and it shows what's happened in the last 66 million years, the Cenozoic Era, the era that we're now in, and it's just, whoops, sorry. How do I get, uh-oh. Okay. Anyway, thanks, Bob, and Chris, and the UV students. I guess that's it. No else. I'll keep going. How do I get back to the beginning?
Probably just the left arrow.
Okay. How'd you know?
Very smart.
Okay. So the Cenozoic Era is the current era we're in. It's been going on for about 66 million years. And the era before that was the Mesozoic. Oh, well, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, the era before that was the Mesozoic, but all of these periods are part of the Cenozoic. And right now, I'm afraid to push a button. Yes. As you can see, I'm technologically challenged.
You're just old.
That's what you get.
Okay, try this one.
Just this one. Okay.
Try it. Yeah.
I don't want to do it.
It's okay.
All right.
Was that your last slide?
Yeah.
Okay, so go back.
Okay. All right.
Sorry.
And how do I go forward now? Just this one?
No, this one.
Oh.
That's going forward.
Okay. All right. So the Cenozoic Era is divided into components, beginning with the Paleocene. That's the oldest. Paleo means old. And that was started 66 million years ago, which is the pointer.
The middle.
Okay. So that went on for a long time. And it ended after about 33 million, 34 million years ago, which was the beginning of the Oligocene. And that ended with the beginning of the Miocene. And then we get to the present eras, the Holocene. And the present is just this little orange blob right here. And that represents the beginning of the so-called Anthropocene. Now, the geologists meet every few years and decide on what to call different eras. And they haven't agreed yet that the Anthropocene is real. But there are lots of people who celebrate the existence of the Anthropocene because it means the domination of the whole world by us, by our species. And that's a cause for glee on the part of some people who really believe that it's God's will that humans should completely dominate the planet. Not all Christians or Jews or Islamic people believe that, but a lot do. It's part of fundamentalism. So, but anyway, you can see how tiny the Anthropocene is. And that's why the geologists have not declared that we're actually in the Anthropocene or the Anthropocene, because they think anything can happen in the next million years or so, and that we won't last very long. So they want to be sure we're gonna be around long enough to justify changing the era we're in to the Anthropocene. So when you hear people use the term, you can say, well, you can call it that, but that's not official yet. So don't worry about it very much. The top one?
The right one, right
The
arrow.
right one. Thank you. How come I keep getting to acknowledgements?
I think
That's
I don't
it?
think there's slides, yeah.
Okay. Then I'll go back to the other talk. So anyway, those are the people who've been nice to me here. I have another slide showing the ones who've been mean to me, but no, I don't. So we can stop the slides now and go back to talking about baboons. Some of you have heard the name Justin Brashears. If you've taken some of the classes in this school, environmental studies, he's a biologist at Berkeley who worked in Africa for quite a while. And one of the things he's done in Africa was to document some interesting things that are happening. And one of those interesting things is that the people in some parts of West Africa have eliminated the large predators. And the consequences of eliminating the large predators have been pretty drastic. Why did people eliminate the large predators and herbivores too? Is because they threaten their children, they threaten their livestock, and the large herbivores eat their crops. And you would do the same thing. I might do the same thing if I were living there too, because it means they have nothing to eat. If these large herbivores, like elephants and rhinos, and large carnivores, like hyenas and lions, get into their farms. So in West Africa, after the lions and hunting dogs, wild dogs they're called sometimes, and leopards were extinguished, what happens? What happens is that something else takes over their, quote, niche, unquote. That is the niche of the carnivore, the large carnivores. Well, there are no large carnivores left, but the next best thing are baboons. Baboons are very intelligent animals that are primates like us and are extraordinarily clever. And there's after the large carnivores, after the large herbivores are eliminated, there's still a lot of smaller animals around. And what the baboons do in West Africa is to walk across the savannas with their fingers touching each other in long lines, in military fashion, just walking across and scooping up anything that moves, any animal that moves. They're basically hoovering up all the remaining animals. It's very clever. But that phenomenon has a name. It's called mesopredator release. That is, when the big predators are gone, like the lions and the leopards and the hunting dogs and the hyenas, then the smaller predators say, yay, we're free at last, and start to reproduce like crazy and take over the hunting niche for eating all the smaller animals, basically cleaning up what's left after the big guys are gone. And so we talked about in my group in San Diego and lots of other groups around the world, the problem of getting rid of large carnivores. Same thing was happening in Yellowstone before the wolves were reintroduced into Yellowstone around 1995. Is that right, Bob? Yeah. And same thing was happening, that the herbivores were exploding in numbers. The deer and particularly the elk were eating up the aspen trees. And there were lots of aspen trees left after a few decades, but they never got any higher than about this high. Why didn't they get any higher than this high? What's magic about 2 or 3 feet in Yellowstone or in any other national park in the West, Western Canada, or Western United States?
Deer. Sometimes what you elk would graze.
Graze what?
The shoots.
Right, right. In the winter, that's the snow level. And the larger herbivores will eat everything above the snow. It's too hard to, unless you're really starving, to dig through the snow to get food. So every winter, or every spring, the aspen and other plants, other trees would grow up. And then they grow up about this high in the summer and fall. And then winter would come, they'd lose their leaves, they'd stop growing. And then the elk, mostly the elk, would come through, sometimes moose, and browse them down to this high, to the snow level again. Every year that cycle would repeat, up and down. And eventually those trees would die because all the energy they were putting into making more branches and leaves would be essentially wasted because the next spring and summer, it'd be browsed down again. Changing the habitat completely from a place that was dominated by plants like willows and aspen to other kinds of plants that didn't have the value. For example, and it's important that those kind of trees survive because birds nest in them, and most of the birds were disappearing. The songbirds, for example, and other animals that needed them were disappearing too. So the message is that we need the large carnivores. If a system loses its large carnivores, its police, then the system will collapse. And we've learned that over and over. It's such an old idea now that everybody knows it, almost everybody who's an ecologist anyway, or an environmentalist. But it's important to remind people how important the large carnivores are. They are the police that keep everybody else in line in ecosystems. And once the police are gone, things go downhill from there. Oh, I'm already at the end. So don't bother donating. I'm kidding. But that slide was made for the US. There's lots of other organizations in British Columbia and Canada that are just as important or more important, certainly more important here. I wanted to thank these guys for being such a help and bringing me coffee and things like that. And I don't have much more to say, but I'd be happy to answer some questions. Thank you very much. Let me read one thing. Sorry. This is a poem by Robinson Jeffers. Robinson Jeffers is a native of my state, California, where I was born. I don't live there now. I live in Colorado. But it's called The Bloody Sire. The Bloody Sire. It is not bad. Let them play. Let the guns bark and the bombing planes speak his prodigious blasphemies. It is not bad. It is high time. Stark violence is still the sire of all the world's values. What but the wolf's tooth whittled so fine the fleet limbs of the antelope? Speaking in evolutionary terms there, that is, natural selection of the wolf upon the antelope made the antelope have the biggest eyes of any of the world's ungulates. Why did the antelope evolve such huge eyes? The pronghorn antelope. It's because this part of the world was dominated by cheetahs and saber-toothed cats. And you had to see them a long way off to escape from them. And you had to have very fast legs to escape them. So violence, that is carnivory, predation, is what created the beauty of the antelope's legs and the speed of the antelope, their grace and their speed. So Jefferson is saying, you know, violence isn't so bad. It's an opinion. Who would remember Helen's face, lacking the terrible halo of spears? Who formed Christ but Herod and Caesar? The cruel and bloody victories of Caesar, violence, the bloody sire of all the world's values. Never weep, let them play. Old violence is not too old to beget new values. Now that's a little extreme. I mean, violence is good, it's up to a point. It does certain things, like it causes a lot of evolution and creates a lot of beauty in the world because of natural selection. But it's kind of bad too. So this is, Robinson Jeffers was kind of weird. I mean, he goes off the deep end a bit, but he has a point that it's violence, the goshawk's wings and talons, that create the beauty of so many other animals, their prey. So beauty itself owes much to violence. It's an interesting idea. So it said, one of the things it implies is there are no absolutes. There are no absolutes. Violence isn't always bad. But so one has to exercise judgment about things like that and about predation. I like it. Okay, any questions? Any thoughts? Yes.
Thanks, Dr. Soulé. You mentioned that people are still debating whether or not the Anthropocene is indeed a new epoch. And I know that a lot of that debate has gone back to asking when did the Anthropocene begin and for what reason. So
Yeah.
people are saying it begins with the human use of fire. Other people point to agriculture.
Right.
More recently, the nuclear bomb being tested. So I was wondering if you could remark on your thoughts about the where, or rather the when and the why these types of changes have been set.
On what? On
When and why.
Oh, yeah. I don't think it makes much difference. What's happening to biodiversity is a sin. I mean, we are destroying the products of hundreds of millions of years of evolution in an instant, in terms of evolutionary time, in an instant. So exactly when the Anthropocene started is a matter of debate that will go on in geological circles for a long time, probably longer than all of us are alive. But the important thing is that we end the extinction crisis as soon as we can, that we somehow decide that enough is enough. And we look at the causes of extinction, and many of them are very difficult to deal with. Like ending poverty on the earth means creating a lot more food, which means growing, which means converting a lot more land, including the Amazon and the Congo, into farms. So if we want to feed all the people that are being born now and will be born in the next few generations, it means there will be no wildlands left, basically, or hardly any. Is that what we want? And if it isn't what we want, what can we do about it? What can we do about global warming? It's the dilemma of our age that none of us has the power of a dictator, of a monarch, to say, okay, that's enough. That's enough fossil fuel combustion, enough carbon in the atmosphere, enough habitat destruction, enough overkilling of animals. We'll just stop, and if you elect me as monarch, I'll do that. But you're not going to do that, and nobody's going to do that. So somehow the people have to decide. Like the people are meeting in Paris sometime in the next next summer to decide on what to do about global warming. We can and have in the past done things that completely change disasters and end them. About 75 years ago, there was a what was it called when all the Dust Bowl occurred, and because of overgrazing, overbrowsing, and poor farming practices that led to amazing dust storms in the 1930s or so. The dust storms continued for years until the dust storms got so bad they reached Washington, D.C. and then they were stopped. Congress was in session. So what needs to happen is a Category 6 hurricane needs to come up the east coast of the United States. I'm not sure about Canada. I don't think it would get that far. It might with climate change. You might be lucky enough to have them in Canada on the east coast. And when Parliament or Congress is in session, and then something will be done about climate change, but not until there's disasters. So we should all pray for disasters, for catastrophes, and maybe 2 or 3 close together. But that will change it. Yes.
You speak of the end of speciation. Could our dominance not be considered an interruption?
By the way, people who want to leave or should leave should go and feel comfortable leaving. Yeah. Sorry, what was the question?
I said, you speak of the end of speciation.
Yeah.
Could our dominance not be considered an interruption in speciation?
Yes, depending on how long it lasts. People talk about the possibility that human beings will go extinct. I don't think they will. And we're too clever by half to go extinct. So that's wishful thinking.
No dominance. So we don't. What I mean is, we may come to a point where we're not so dominant anymore. Hence,
yeah,
not necessarily the end of speciation.
We don't have many rivals. Cockroaches, maybe, and rats. So I don't think dominance is. I think as long as civilization exists, we will be dominant. So we need to come to our senses, actually. And I think it's been done in the past. That's why I mentioned the Dust Bowl. We stopped the Dust Bowl. And so that means we have the capacity to learn. But it takes disasters to do that. But climate change is probably the best hope we have. So we should welcome it, because I think that's going to be serious enough. Some people have referred to climate change as a civilization ender, and it could be. So I think we should welcome it but bring it along as fast as we can, which means getting bigger cars and burning more gasoline. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much. Oh, and these books.